My name is Clara Lane, and when I was 18, my parents kicked me out of the house. My father said I was being ungrateful, and my mother pressed a $20 bill into my palm before locking the door behind me. "Your sister deserves the future, not you," they said, as the rain soaked through my clothes. I was sick, homeless, and invisible. For weeks, I slept at a bus stop, wondering if this was how my story ended, but it didn't. 5 years later, I built a company from nothing, one that helps others find the chances I was denied. And one morning, my sister walked into my office, dressed for an interview, not knowing who I'd become. I smiled and said, "We're here to discuss your qualifications. Have you ever been told you didn't deserve a future? Tell me where you're watching from." I grew up in a town so small that every mailbox carried the same last name and every dream had a boundary line drawn by cornfields. Our house sat on the edge of Bloomington, Indiana, white paint peeling, the scent of engine oil always lingering in the garage. My father, Robert, was a mechanical engineer who believed emotions were distractions and perfection was proof of love. My mother, Diane, worked as a bookkeeper at a local insurance firm, obsessed with appearances, her hair always sprayed into a helmet that never moved even when her temper did. And then there was Lena, my older sister, the miracle daughter, the golden one. Every compliment in that house seemed to find its way to her, like light bending toward the brightest thing in the room. I was quieter. The kind of child who built things from scraps, who liked the hum of machines more than the noise of people. While Lena practiced piano in the living room, I sat cross-legged on the floor of the garage, rewiring broken radios and turning soda cans into small spinning toys. My father once looked at me and said, not unkindly but firmly, "That's not real work. Fixing junk doesn't build futures." I remember nodding, even though somewhere inside, I already knew he was wrong. Dinner time in our house was an unspoken hierarchy. My parents and Lena took the 4 wooden chairs around the main table. I always unfolded the old metal one from the pantry. Its hinge squeaked each time I sat down, a sound that seemed to announce my place. Temporary, adjustable, removable. The metal was always colder than the others. It became a small ritual. Everyone settled comfortably while I balanced my plate on the edge of that chair, pretending not to notice the difference. Years later, I realized the chair had become a symbol of everything I was in that family. A placeholder, useful only when there weren't enough real seats. When Lena turned 16, she got a car, a used silver Honda, with a red ribbon tied around it. Mom baked a chocolate cake with her name written in cursive icing. That same week, for my birthday, I got a $25 bookstore voucher. "You like reading, right?" Mom said. "This should keep you busy." I smiled, said thank you, and swallowed the sting. The rule in our house was simple. Don't make a scene. So I didn't. I learned early that my mother's sigh carried more weight than any argument I could win, and that my father's silence was a wall no voice could climb. Still, I worked hard. I had straight A's, a perfect attendance record, and a quiet determination that I thought would earn me pride, maybe even a hint of affection. In sophomore year, I entered the state science fair with a homemade filtration system built from coffee filters, charcoal, and tubing from old lawn equipment. It worked so well that I won first place. I came home holding the small gold trophy like it was proof that I existed. At dinner, I told them the news, waiting for a reaction. My mother looked up from her phone just long enough to say, "That's nice, but Lena just got invited to a leadership camp in Chicago." "Isn't that great?" Everyone clapped for Lena. I smiled and pretended the silence pressing down on me was just air. It was always like that. If Lena caught a cold, the house turned into a sick ward. If I had a fever, Mom said, "You'll be fine, take a shower." When Lena stayed out late, Dad called her independent. When I asked to go to the library after dark, he said, "Not safe for you." The double standards weren't shouted, they lived in the spaces between sentences, in the way praise traveled like gravity, always toward the same person. I started spending more time alone in the garage, where the smell of oil and dust felt more honest than the perfume of my mother's kitchen. I found common patterns, how circuits connected, how electricity obeyed rules even when people didn't. The quiet hum of a repaired radio became my applause. Sometimes, I'd catch my reflection in the metal cabinet, my hair pulled back, hands covered in grease, and think, maybe this is who I really am, someone who works in silence until things start working again. But silence has a way of sinking into your bones. At first, it feels safe, then it becomes the only language you know. In our house, speaking up was like lighting a match in a room full of gas. You learn to keep the flame to yourself. I watched my parents beam at Lena's every achievement, her debate trophies, her college letters, her photographs in the local paper, and I wondered if maybe I was born just to be her shadow. Every time someone said the brown girls, they meant her, and I became a plural by accident. Sometimes, when the house was quiet after dinner, I'd take the foldable chair out to the porch and sit under the porch light, watching bugs circle the bulb. The metal creaked beneath me, and I imagined what it would feel like to sit somewhere that didn't squeak, somewhere that didn't remind me I was temporary. Looking back now, I don't think my parents hated me. They just didn't see me. They were so busy polishing the golden child that they forgot the other one could shine too. But even then, even at 16, I understood one thing. Invisibility can be armor. If no one expects anything of you, you're free to build in secret. I kept my head down, saved money from tutoring, spent nights sketching designs for mechanical projects I'd never show anyone. I told myself that one day, I'd build something big enough that even they couldn't ignore it. But that's not how it happened. When the storm finally came, it didn't start with noise. It started with silence, the kind that feels like warning. The envelope came on a Thursday afternoon, thin and white with a university seal in the corner. I remember holding it like it was made of glass. My hands shook so much that I tore the edge unevenly. Inside was a single-page an acceptance letter from Indiana State University, major in logistics and supply chain management. A partial scholarship. Not full, but enough to make me believe life could finally open its door just a little wider. I'd worked for that moment: late-night study sessions, part-time shifts at the library, weekends tutoring middle school kids for $10 an hour. For the first time, I felt like the world had noticed me. When I got home, the sun was dipping low behind the cornfields. The air smelled like rain and motor oil. Mom was at the kitchen counter, still in her work blouse, sorting through bills. Dad was at the table reading the paper. Lena was scrolling through her phone, her perfectly polished nails tapping against the glass. I held up the letter, my heart hammering. "I got in," I said. "Indiana State, Logistics Program. They offered me a partial scholarship." Mom didn't look up. "That's nice," she said, flipping another envelope open. "But you know we can't afford 2 tuitions. Lena's pre-law is already expensive." Dad lowered his paper, his expression flat. "You're 18 now, Clara. Time to be realistic. We can't pay for everything." The words hit harder than I expected. I stood there, the letter still trembling in my hand. "Realistic?" I repeated. "Or invisible again?" The room went still. Even the clock on the wall seemed to hesitate before ticking again. Lena looked up from her phone, lips curving into that faint practice smirk that always made me feel smaller. "She's overreacting," she said softly, like she was stating a fact. Something in me cracked. I'd spent years swallowing words, folding myself smaller to fit their comfort. But that night, the silence I'd built finally splintered. "I've done everything right," I said, my voice shaking. "Straight A's. I've worked part-time since I was 16. I never asked for anything. You've never even asked what I want." Mom's head snapped up, her tone sharp. "Stop raising your voice." "I'm not." I started, but Dad slammed his hand against the table, the sound sharp enough to cut through my breath. "Enough," he shouted. "You think you're so capable. Fine, prove it. You're on your own." I froze. The words didn't register at first. Then Mom sighed, reached into her purse, and pulled out a $20 bill. She pressed it into my palm like it was a gift, her voice cool, almost rehearsed. "Be independent," she said. Lena laughed under her breath, tucking her hair behind her ear. "Consider it a head start on reality." Something in my chest burned, a slow ache that spread to my throat. I looked at them, the family I had tried to earn for 18 years, and realized I was standing in a place that had never really been mine. I could have begged. I could have promised to work harder. But I didn't. I folded the letter, slipped it into my bag, and walked down the hall. The house felt different that night. The framed photos of Lena on the piano, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the smell of lemon-scented cleaner, it all felt like someone else's home. My room looked smaller than ever, as if it already knew I didn't belong there. I packed a single suitcase, jeans, notebooks, a sweater that still smelled faintly of detergent. When I turned around, Mom was standing in the doorway, arms crossed. "You'll regret this," she said. I wanted to tell her that I already did. Outside, the sky had opened up, rain falling in long, slanted lines. The sound was loud against the concrete, heavy like breath in a cold room. Dad didn't come out to say goodbye. Lena stood by the window, her phone lighting up her face. I caught her reflection in the glass. She looked curious, not sorry. I stepped onto the porch. The wooden boards creaked under my weight. My mother followed me halfway, holding the door open just enough to keep the rain from touching her shoes. "Remember," she said, her voice distant. "You wanted this." Then she closed the door. The rain hit my skin, sharp and cold, soaking through my hoodie in seconds. I walked down the driveway, the small suitcase bumping against my leg. By the time I reached the street, my hair was plastered to my forehead, my shoes heavy with water. I stopped once to look back. The house glowed faintly through the storm, warm and untouchable, like a life sealed behind glass. A car passed, splashing through a puddle, its headlights cutting through the rain and catching my face for a brief second. I saw my reflection in the window, wet, trembling, but still standing. I pulled the $20 bill from my pocket. It was already damp, the ink starting to blur. I pressed it flat against my palm and whispered to myself, "This is all the proof they think I need to survive." By the time I reached the bus stop, the rain had turned to a downpour. The streetlights flickered, halos of yellow in the gray night. I sat down on the cold metal bench, the suitcase beside me, the letter from Indiana State still tucked in my bag. For a moment, I wanted to rip it apart, but I didn't. I folded my arms, tried to stop shaking, and watched the water collect in the gutter. A bus passed without stopping. The driver glanced at me but kept going. I didn't blame him. I must have looked like a ghost, half real, half left behind. My breath fogged the air, and I thought about Lena's words. A head start on reality. Maybe she was right. Maybe this was what reality felt like: wet, cold, and brutally quiet. I don't remember how long I sat there. The rain didn't stop that night. It turned the street into a blur of silver threads, each one whispering against the pavement. I stayed on the bus bench until the sky turned gray, my clothes clinging to me, my chest aching with every breath. The cold had settled deep, sharp, and heavy, like a secret I couldn't shake. I tried to curl up tighter, but the metal seat beneath me was slick with water. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the house again: warm lights, steady voices, the kind of world that no longer had a door for me. Somewhere between the wind and the hum of passing cars, I must have fallen asleep. When I woke, it was to a voice, gentle, confused. "Miss? Are you okay?" I blinked up at a man in a heavy coat, holding a steaming cup of coffee. He was maybe in his 50s, with soft gray hair and eyes that carried the kind of kindness you don't see often anymore. "You're freezing," he said, setting the cup beside me. "You need a hospital." I tried to protest, but the words came out broken, my throat dry, my lungs burning. He didn't argue. Within minutes, headlights flared again, this time red and blue. The paramedic spoke in calm, practiced tones. "What's your address, miss?" One of them asked. I wanted to answer, but I couldn't. I didn't have one anymore. So I said nothing. The last thing I saw before the world blurred was the man Mr. David, as I'd learn later, folding my damp $20 bill and tucking it into my jacket pocket. Keep this, he murmured. You'll need it more than I do. The hospital light was too white. It hummed above me, relentless and sterile. When I opened my eyes, the world smelled of antiseptic and rain still clinging to my skin. A nurse leaned over, checking the monitor. Her badge read Miller. You're in County General, she said softly. You collapsed from exposure and pneumonia. We had no ID on you except your name on this envelope. She gestured to the crumpled acceptance letter, its ink smeared but still legible. Then she wrapped a plastic band around my wrist. I glanced down. Name, Clara Brown. Address, unknown. For a moment, I stared at those words like they belonged to someone else. Unknown address. It was true. I had nowhere to go back to, nothing waiting on the other side of this sterile white room. I was untethered, unanchored, but somehow, strangely, alive. Later that day, a doctor came in with a clipboard and a kind smile. You're lucky someone found you when they did, he said. Your lungs were in bad shape. A few more hours in that weather and… He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. I just nodded, staring at the IV drip beside me, counting the slow rhythm of the drops. 2 days passed. I didn't have visitors, but the nurses were kind. They left extra crackers on the tray and spoke to me as if I weren't invisible. I overheard one of them at the counter say something about charity care paperwork, and I realized they were trying to find a way to cover my bill. When the discharge nurse came in with the clipboard, she looked almost apologetic. Your total balance after assistance is $42.86, she said. But Mr. David already took care of it. He insisted. Mr. David. The stranger with the gray hair and the warm coffee. I didn't know what to say. Gratitude felt too small for what he'd done. I pressed my hand against the pocket of my jacket. The $20 bill was still there, dry now, folded perfectly square. The corners were torn, the green faded, but it was mine. I looked down at it and whispered, "That's my independence." Not because it could buy me anything, but because it was the only thing I'd been allowed to keep. They gave me a plastic bag of donated clothes and a pamphlet for a women's shelter across town. A volunteer from the hospital drove me there, a quiet woman who talked about the weather and the Seattle Mariners game like we were old friends. When we arrived, the shelter was smaller than I expected, tucked between a laundromat and a thrift store. A sign by the door read, Haven House, for young women finding their way. The staff gave me a small bed by the window, a locker for my things, and a blanket that smelled faintly of detergent and metal. That night, I lay awake listening to the rain drumming softly on the tin roof. It wasn't the same as the rain that had soaked me at the bus stop. It was gentler, steadier, almost like a heartbeat. I could hear other women breathing in their bunks, some crying quietly, some snoring. For the first time in days, I didn't feel like I was disappearing. In the mornings, I helped the staff clean. I mopped floors, sorted donated clothes, folded sheets. The work was simple, but it kept my hands moving. Sometimes, when I passed the mirror near the entrance, I didn't recognize the girl staring back, pale skin, hair tied back messily, a faint line of exhaustion beneath her eyes. Yet something in her gaze was still sharp, still alive. At night, I'd sit by the window, watching the rain streak down the glass, the city lights reflecting in each droplet. The sound reminded me of the bus stop, but this time I wasn't alone. The world outside still felt big and indifferent, but somehow it had made room for me. Maybe the universe doesn't throw people away, it just pushes them toward where they're meant to rebuild. One night, as thunder rolled faintly in the distance, I took out the hospital bracelet from my bag. The thin plastic glinted in the dim light, the words unknown address still visible. I pressed it flat against my palm, then tucked it inside the pocket of my coat next to the $20 bill. 2 relics of the same storm. 2 reminders that I was still here. It would take months before I was strong enough to think about school or work again. But every breath that came easier, every morning I woke to the sound of rain and not silence, felt like a small victory. They had thrown me out, yes. They had erased me from their table, from their plans, from their love. But as I watched the rain shimmer under the streetlight outside that shelter window, I realized something quietly beautiful. Maybe they hadn't pushed me into nothing. Maybe they'd unknowingly cleared a space for me in the world, a place where I could finally build something of my own. They threw me out. But maybe the world was finally making room for me. 2 weeks after leaving the hospital, I got my first lead. The shelter coordinator, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes named Ruth, told me about a small diner on the corner of 5th and Pine that was hiring. They pay by the hour, cash tips, she said, handing me a crumpled flyer. The owner's tough, but fair. She gave one of our girls a chance last winter. The place was called Alvarez's Diner, the kind of neighborhood spot that smelled like fresh coffee and bacon grease no matter the time of day. When I walked in for the interview, the morning rush had just ended. The floors gleamed, the counter stools squeaked, and a woman with streaks of silver in her dark hair was wiping down a coffee pot. Her name tag read Miss Alvarez. She looked me over once, my thrift store shirt, my too tight shoes, the hospital bracelet still faintly marking my wrist, and said, "You ever worked in food service?" "No," I admitted. "But I learn fast." She handed me an apron. "Good. Start by cleaning the syrup bottles. If you last till Friday, we'll talk." And just like that, I had a job. The first few days were brutal. The shifts started before sunrise. The orders came faster than my hands could move. But there was something grounding about it, the hiss of the grill, the clatter of dishes, the rhythm of people coming and going. For the first time since leaving home, I wasn't invisible. I was part of a machine that needed me, even if only to pour coffee or wipe a counter. Miss Alvarez was stern but not unkind. She corrected me often, never raising her voice, but her eyes missed nothing. "You want the regulars to come back?" she'd say. "Remember how they like their coffee. People don't pay for food, they pay to be remembered." Then there was Ben, the delivery driver who hauled crates of produce from the market every morning. He was in his late 20s, broad-shouldered, always humming something under his breath. Unlike most, he didn't look at me with pity when he noticed my threadbare shoes or my half-eaten sandwich during breaks. Instead, he treated me like I belonged there. One afternoon, as I helped unload boxes from his truck, he watched me rearrange them by category: dry goods here, perishables there, oldest stock up front. "You always sort stuff like that?" he asked. I shrugged. "Makes it easier to find things later." He smiled. "You've got a head for systems." Then, it was the first time anyone had said that like it was a compliment, not a criticism. Over the next few weeks, I found myself watching how he worked. Ben's roots were chaos: wrong orders, late drop-offs, lost invoices. But he kept his cool, always finding a way to get everything done. One day, I asked him how he managed it. He pulled a folded sheet of paper from his pocket. On it was a map of Seattle, covered in lines and circles. "I plan my routes," he said. "Saves gas, saves time. Sometimes I even beat traffic." That night, after closing, I borrowed a napkin and started sketching out my own version of his map. The diner suppliers, their addresses, the times deliveries came in, I began drawing little lines between them, trying to see patterns. It was the same satisfaction I used to get when fixing radios back home, fitting chaos into order. The next morning, Miss Alvarez found the napkin on the counter. She looked at it for a long moment before glancing up at me. "You did this?" I nodded, embarrassed. "Just trying to help organize the deliveries." She folded the napkin and tucked it into her apron pocket. "Keep that brain of yours sharp, Clara. Not many people can see patterns like that. It'll take you somewhere." Her words stayed with me. Days turned into weeks. The diner became my classroom. I learned how inventory worked, how schedules were built, how one broken link could slow the entire chain. When Ben's truck broke down one morning, I reorganized the day's deliveries for him using the phone book and a borrowed laptop at the shelter. When everything arrived on time, he laughed and called me the human GPS. One slow afternoon, while refilling salt shakers, he asked me, "What do you want to do next?" No one had ever asked me that before. I froze, the glass shaker halfway to the table. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Well," he said, setting down his mug, "figure it out. You're too smart to stay wiping counters forever." That night, I couldn't sleep. His question kept echoing in my head. What did I want to do next? For years, I'd only thought about surviving the next day, the next meal, the next mistake. But now, something inside me had shifted. Maybe I could build something organized, efficient, clean, something that made sense. The next morning, I brought a small notebook to work. During breaks, I filled it with lists, supplier schedules, customer flow, inventory counts. The diner's chaos slowly turned into numbers and lines on paper. Miss Alvarez noticed and smiled. "That's how business people start," she said. "With observation." Sometimes, after closing, I'd stay behind, sitting in a corner booth with a cup of coffee and the sound of rain against the windows. I'd trace delivery routes, redesign storage layouts, and imagine systems that worked perfectly where nothing was wasted and no one was left behind. I didn't know it yet, but those sketches, the loops and arrows and names scrawled in ink, were the first blueprints of something much bigger. One night, Miss Alvarez passed by my booth, saw the drawings, and tapped the page with her finger. "You've got a head for systems," she said again, her tone more deliberate this time. "Keep that. The world runs on chaos. People like you keep it moving." When she walked away, I sat there staring at the lines I'd drawn. They weren't just delivery routes anymore, they were pathways, each one leading somewhere I hadn't dared imagine. For the first time, the future didn't feel like a locked door. It felt like a map waiting to be followed. Outside, the rain kept falling, steady and rhythmic against the diner roof. I pressed my hand to the glass, watching the streetlights blur into gold streaks. I wasn't sure where I was headed yet, but I knew I was finally on the move. It started with the notebook. The same one I'd used to track deliveries, now filled with more pages than I could count: routes, schedules, lists, notes about how things connected and where they broke. I began spending my evenings in the small computer lab at the women's shelter, watching free online courses about logistics, supply chains, and warehouse management. The screen light flickered across my tired eyes as I repeated formulas on Excel, memorizing shortcuts, learning how numbers could turn chaos into something predictable. There was comfort in it, a rhythm that reminded me of control. When you have nothing, structure becomes your safety. Every night I studied until the curfew alarm blinked red, then slipped the notebook under my pillow like a secret. During the day, I tested everything I learned at Alvarez's diner. I reorganized the supply shelves, color-coded the condiment drawers, and built a rotation schedule that matched the delivery times. Within weeks, we stopped running out of ingredients, customers got their orders faster, and for the first time, Miss Alvarez actually smiled without hiding it. "You did something right," she said one Friday evening, balancing the day's receipts in her hand. "We made 15% more this month, and nobody quit." I looked up from wiping the counter. "It's just small adjustments," I said. She laughed softly. "Small adjustments make big differences. Don't ever forget that." Her trust gave me courage. I stayed after hours, helping her tally costs, typing receipts into spreadsheets on the old laptop she barely used. At first, she watched me with suspicion, maybe afraid I'd break it, but soon she started asking questions. "What's this formula thing again?" she'd say, leaning over my shoulder. "Sumif? Sounds like magic." I showed her how to use it, how to track profit margins, how to plan shifts so no one burned out. I didn't realize it then, but I was building more than systems. I was building a way to keep people steady, the same way I'd needed something steady when my life fell apart. Ben noticed the change too. One afternoon, while delivering crates of eggs and flour, He watched me direct 2 new staff members on restocking. "You run this place now?" he teased. "Just trying to make things work smoother," I said, adjusting the clipboard. He leaned against the counter, his hands still dusty from the boxes. "You ever think about doing this for real? Logistics, management, whatever you call it?" I looked up, half laughing. "People don't just fall into that kind of work, Ben." "Maybe not," he said, pushing his cap back. "But you're already doing it. Might as well get paid better for it." He wasn't wrong. The thought lingered like a spark I didn't know how to hold. That night, I searched job boards on the shelter computer, scrolling through listings I wasn't qualified for: operations assistant, logistics coordinator, route analyst. Each description read like a language I was just beginning to understand. I saved a few, more out of hope than expectation. Meanwhile, the diner became my experiment ground. I turned our weekly inventory into an Excel chart, created graphs for peak hours, even predicted how much milk we'd need by the end of each week. The others started calling me the numbers girl. I didn't mind, it was better than being invisible. A few weeks later, Ben arrived with a new logo on his truck: Everline Freight. His company had merged with another small transport firm, and he looked exhausted but proud. Over lunch, he told me they were expanding. "We're hiring new clerks, warehouse assistants, route planners, small-time stuff, but steady pay," he said between bites of sandwich. Then he paused, glancing at me. "You should apply." I nearly choked on my coffee. "Me? I don't even have a degree." "So what?" he shrugged. "You've got experience. You made this diner run like a factory on rails. That's more than most college kids can say." I hesitated. "They'll never take someone like me." Ben smiled, eyes kind. "You're exactly the kind they need, someone who knows how to keep things moving when everything's falling apart." He said it so simply, like a fact, that it silenced every doubt I had. That evening, I went back to the shelter and wrote my first resume. It was bare 2 short jobs, no references, but I filled it with what I could. Scheduling, inventory, delivery coordination. I printed it on the shelter's old printer, the ink smudged on one corner. Then I waited. A week later, I got the call. The HR assistant from Everline Freight wanted me to come in for an interview. I didn't own formal clothes, so Miss Alvarez lent me one of her blouses and pressed it carefully, as if ironing hope into the fabric. "You'll do fine," she said, tucking a 20 into my palm before I could refuse. "Lunch money, don't argue." Oh. The interview took place in a modest office on the south side of the city. The waiting room smelled like coffee and motor oil, the same scent that had followed me since Indiana. The manager, a broad man named Tom, asked simple questions. "You good with numbers? Can you stay organized under pressure? Ever handled logistics before?" I answered honestly, no embellishments, just what I knew. He nodded, tapping his pen. "You've got no degree," he said finally, "but you've got the right instincts. Let's start you on data entry and see how it goes." When I walked out of that building, the air felt different, lighter somehow. I didn't have everything figured out, but for the first time, I had direction. That night, I went back to Alvarez's diner one last time. Miss Alvarez and Ben were both there. I told them I got the job. Miss Alvarez didn't say much, she just nodded once, her eyes a little shinier than usual. Ben grinned, handing me a paper cup of coffee. "Told you," he said. "You're meant for bigger routes." I stood there, holding the cup, watching rain slide down the windows like silver veins across the glass. Everything I had built so far, every chart, every notebook page, every long night studying alone, had led me here. It wasn't a grand success story yet. It was something smaller, quieter, steadier, a foundation. I smiled and whispered, mostly to myself. When you have nothing, structure becomes your safety. The first weeks at Everline Freight felt like learning a new language. The office was small, a converted warehouse near the port, where the walls smelled faintly of diesel and old paper. My desk sat by the window, facing the loading docks. Trucks came and went all day long, engines growling like restless animals. I started as a data entry clerk, responsible for logging shipment numbers and updating spreadsheets. It wasn't glamorous, but I didn't care. Every click, every line of data felt like a step away from the girl who once slept at a bus stop. Tom, the operations manager, was a man of few words but many maps. He had a sharp memory, a coffee addiction, and a surprising patience for teaching. "These routes," he said one afternoon, handing me a stack of delivery sheets, "look simple, but they'll eat you alive if you don't understand them. Every road is a story." I spent hours learning how to read freight maps, how to balance miles with fuel, weight with time. At first, the lines and grids overwhelmed me. But soon, patterns began to appear, like hidden veins in stone. One evening, as Tom pointed to a reroute around a flooded bridge, something clicked. "Routes are like people," I murmured, tracing the curved line on the paper. "Every detour has a reason." Tom looked at me, then nodded. "Exactly. The trick is knowing when to reroute, and when to push through." That sentence stayed with me. I took every task seriously, even the tedious ones, counting inventory, confirming manifests, sending updates to drivers at odd hours. When the others left for the day, I stayed behind, my monitor glowing in the dark. I wasn't just learning logistics, I was learning human rhythm, how people moved, how systems broke, how to rebuild without losing control. Late one night, when the office was silent except for the hum of the vending machine, I opened my drawer and took out the hospital bracelet. The plastic had started to yellow, but the words were still there. "Unknown address." I looped it around the corner of my computer screen. It wasn't decoration, it was a reminder. Never forget where you started. As the months passed, I became faster. Tom began trusting me with route adjustments and client calls. When one of the coordinators quit unexpectedly, he handed me their folder without warning. "You've got this," he said. "You're already doing half the job anyway." The work was relentless: early mornings, late nights, missed weekends, but I didn't mind. There was something addictive about making chaos make sense. When drivers called about delays, I found alternate routes in minutes. When invoices got mixed up, I reorganized the files until the whole department ran smoother. The others began coming to me with small questions. "Clara, can you check this shipment? Can you help me fix this schedule?" They didn't say it, but I knew I had earned their respect. Outside of work, I kept studying. After shifts, I'd head to the library or the 24-hour diner near my apartment, the same one that smelled like coffee and rain. I watched free online lectures about management, communication, and systems design. I learned about people, how to lead them, how to listen. I realized logistics wasn't just about trucks and timetables. It was about humans, their timing, their habits, their small, predictable errors. Tom noticed. "You're not like the others," he said one Friday evening, as we reviewed quarterly reports. "Most people clock out and forget this place exists. You stay and look for patterns." I smiled. "Maybe it's just habit. When you've been lost before, you like knowing where everything goes." He chuckled. "Whatever it is, keep it. You've got a gift for structure." Over time, he began giving me more responsibility, supervising shipments, mentoring new hires, shadowing department meetings. I kept a quiet confidence, never boasting, just working. Sometimes, when things got overwhelming, I'd glance at that plastic bracelet on my monitor. It reminded me that I'd survived worse than long hours and tight deadlines. 2 years passed. Everline expanded, adding new clients, new routes. I helped design a routing system that reduced delivery times by 12%. Tom presented it at a company meeting and, for the first time, mentioned my name in front of everyone. "This one," he said, pointing to me, "kept us running when the rest of us were drowning." Applause followed. I smiled but said nothing. Inside, something warm and steady unfurled, a quiet pride that didn't need to be seen to be real. Still, I kept pushing myself. I started coming in on weekends to learn the back-end operations, warehouse layout, driver assignments, HR processes. I wanted to understand how every piece fit together. Logistics was like a living organism, and I wanted to know its heartbeat. One evening, I stayed late to finish a report. The building was empty except for the hum of fluorescent lights. Outside, rain tapped gently against the glass, and in the reflection, I saw my own face framed by the glow of spreadsheets. For a brief second, I thought of that rainy bus stop 5 years ago. The same rain, the same city, but a different version of me. When I finally turned off the lights and stepped outside, Tom was locking up. "You ever rest?" he asked, half amused. "Eventually," I said, pulling my coat tighter. He paused, studying me for a moment. "You know, Clara," he said, "you remind me of when I started. Hungry to prove something, but the thing about hunger, it doesn't end when you succeed. It just changes what you crave." He was right. I didn't crave approval anymore. I craved purpose. 3 years after I first walked into Everline, Tom called me into his office. The room smelled like coffee and fresh ink, as always. He didn't look up from the papers on his desk when he said, "We're opening a new position, junior project manager. You've been doing half the work already, so it's time to make it official." He blinked. "Are you serious?" He finally looked up, smiling. "Dead serious. Don't say no, or I'll regret teaching you all my tricks." I laughed for the first time in what felt like years. When I stepped out of his office, the entire team clapped. Someone had taped a note on my computer monitor: "You earned this, Clara." That night, I didn't celebrate with champagne or a party. I went home, made instant noodles, and sat by the window as the rain fell steady against the glass. I touched the hospital bracelet still hanging on my monitor, and for the first time, I didn't feel like unknown address anymore. I whispered softly to the dark, "I know where I belong now." The promotion at Everline was only the beginning. The more I learned about the industry, the more I realized how broken it was, not just in logistics, but in how people were treated. The small companies struggled to stay afloat because they lacked structure. Good employees were overworked. Bad management drove the rest away. I'd seen it too many times, systems failing not because of inefficiency, but because no one had ever taught people how to build things that lasted. It started as a late-night idea, scribbled in the margins of my notebook after another 12-hour day. What if there was a company that helped small businesses run like big ones? What if fairness and structure weren't luxuries, but the foundation? I stayed up that night sketching names, words that meant growth, rebuilding, renewal. Then one stood out: Emerge. It felt right, like a quiet promise to myself. Emerge Talent Solutions was born on the back of a diner napkin and an Excel sheet. The tagline came easily: built from the ground up. At first, it was just me, no investors, no office, no safety net. I quit Everline with Tom's reluctant blessing and my entire savings account of $3,100. "You're either crazy or brave," he said, handing me an old stapler as a parting gift. "Maybe both." I found a cheap space above a print shop downtown. The windows rattled whenever a bus passed, and the heater barely worked, but I didn't care. It had a desk, a chair, and enough room for my laptop and ambition. On my first day, I unpacked 3 things: the hospital bracelet, the $20 bill my mother had thrown at me, and a small frame with the new logo I designed. I placed them carefully on the desk, a shrine to survival. The $20 hung in glass on the wall, the ink faded, the paper warped by time. I'd kept it not as a reminder of rejection, but as proof that I'd turned pity into capital. "They gave me a door slam," I whispered as I pinned the logo above my desk. I built an open one. The first few months were brutal. I cold emailed local businesses, offered free consultations, rewrote their schedules, fixed their delivery systems, trained their staff on communication and workflow. Half the time, they didn't pay. The other half, they paid in gratitude and coffee. But word spread: the woman who can fix anything. That's what they called me. By the end of the first year, I had 6 clients and 2 part-time assistants. We worked late into the night, laptops glowing in that tiny office, the smell of instant noodles and ambition filling the air. I paid them fairly, even when it meant skipping my own meals. I knew too well what it felt like to be undervalued. When one of my clients, a bakery chain on the brink of closing, posted about how I'd saved their business, the story caught attention. A local journalist reached out, curious about the young woman rebuilding small businesses. A week later, the article ran in the Seattle Herald, "From Homeless Teen to CEO: How Clara Lane is Reshaping the Future of Work." That was the first time I saw my new name in print. I'd changed my last name months earlier. Brown had felt too heavy, too haunted. Lane was simple. It meant path, direction, progress. A new route. When people asked, I said it was my mother's maiden name. The truth was, I'd built it myself. The article changed everything. My inbox flooded with messages from business owners, from old acquaintances, even from people who had once overlooked me. They wanted advice, mentorship, help. Some wanted jobs. I hired slowly, carefully. Every employee signed the same values statement I'd written on a torn piece of notebook paper the night I started. We don't just build systems, we build people. By year 2, Emerge Talent Solutions had moved into a larger office, a loft space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The old heater was gone, replaced by the hum of new computers and the chatter of a growing team. On the main wall hung 3 frames: the hospital bracelet, the $20 bill, and the company logo. People asked why I kept them there. I told them the truth. Because that's where everything started. Pain, poverty, persistence. You need all 3 to build something real. Sometimes I'd walk in early, before the others arrived, and sit at my desk with my coffee cooling beside me, watching the sunrise turn the city gold. I'd think about Miss Alvarez wiping counters, Ben humming in his truck, Tom and his maps, the sound of rain on a shelter roof. Each of them had been a part of this. The foundation of my company wasn't concrete or code, it was kindness. As the company grew, I began offering workshops for free, training young women from shelters and halfway houses on logistics and workforce management. Watching them find confidence reminded me of myself 5 years earlier, shivering in a hospital bed with an unknown address bracelet. When one of them, a quiet girl named Mariah, landed her first job at a logistics firm, she hugged me and said, "You changed my life." I smiled and told her, "You did that yourself. I just showed you the map." At our 2-year anniversary, my team surprised me with a plaque that read, "To Clara Lane, who built something out of nothing." I couldn't speak for a moment. The weight of it, the irony, the symmetry hit me all at once. Later that night, when everyone had gone, I stood alone in the quiet office. The city outside was glowing, rain soft against the glass. I ran my fingers across the framed bracelet, the $20 bill, the logo beneath them. My reflection merged with those relics, and for the first time, I saw not just survival but creation. They had once told me I didn't deserve a future. That my sister did. That I should disappear quietly. But I hadn't disappeared. I had built a future not just for myself, but for others like me, those who had been dismissed, overlooked, unseen. I turned off the lights, the room illuminated only by the faint city glow. As I closed the door behind me, I looked back at the words painted near the entrance: my company's promise, my personal truth, built from the ground up. And for the first time, I believed it completely. It was a Thursday morning in late spring when the email came through. My HR assistant, Maya, appeared at the doorway of my office, tablet in hand, her tone casual but curious. "We've got a new candidate for the operations coordinator position," she said. Strong resume, 3 years at Greenway Logistics, some management experience. Her name's, she paused, squinting at the screen, Lena Brown. The name hit me like the soft echo of a door I thought I'd already closed. I looked up from my computer, expression calm, though inside, time slowed. Lena Brown. My sister. the golden child of the Brown family. The last face I'd seen through the rain before everything changed. Maya didn't notice my silence at first. "Should I schedule her?" she asked again. I could have said no. I could have deleted the application, pretended it never crossed my desk. But something steadier, deeper than anger, spoke for me. "Schedule her," I said simply, my voice even. That night, I sat alone in my office long after everyone had left. The city hummed beyond the glass, and the framed $20 bill caught the last trace of light. I stared at it, remembering the way it had crumpled in my palm as the rain poured down. 5 years had passed, yet the memory hadn't aged a day. I touched the edge of the frame and whispered to myself, "Let's see if she's learned anything about fairness." 2 days later, Maya brought Lena in. I heard the click of her heels before I saw her the same confident rhythm I used to envy when we were kids walking to school. The door opened, and she stepped inside. Lena Brown looked exactly like the version of her that had lived in my memory, elegant, composed, polished. But there was something else now, a faint uncertainty hiding beneath her practiced smile. "Good morning," she said, her voice steady but her hands tightening slightly around her portfolio. She didn't recognize me. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "Please, have a seat." Maya introduced us formally, unaware of the storm that had just entered the room. Then she left, closing the glass door behind her. The sound clicked like punctuation, just the two of us now. I opened her resume, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make her shift in her seat. "So," I began, professional, detached. "Tell me about a time you faced a difficult team dynamic." She straightened, eager to impress. "At my previous company, I managed a team that struggled with communication," she said. "I had to enforce accountability and maintain fairness." "Fairness," I repeated, my eyes still on the page. "That's an interesting word. What does fairness mean to you?" Lena hesitated. "It means making sure everyone gets what they deserve." I lifted my gaze then, meeting hers directly for the first time. For a brief second, she faltered. Something in my face, my voice must have tugged at her memory. But she blinked, brushed it off, and continued. "I believe in second chances too. People can change if they're given the opportunity." I smiled faintly. "I agree." "Dak." I kept the questions coming: project management, client communication, logistics optimization. Her answers were competent but cautious, like someone trying to read the tone of a room they didn't understand. I watched her shift between confidence and discomfort, and in each flicker of her expression, I saw the ghost of every moment she'd looked down on me. Then, halfway through the interview, it happened. She glanced around the office while I typed notes into my laptop. Her eyes landed on the wall behind me, the framed $20 bill, the hospital bracelet mounted beside it, and the plaque etched with the words, "Built from the ground up." Her breath caught. I saw it, the sudden stillness, the way her fingers froze midair. She blinked once, twice, as if her eyes were lying to her. Then she looked back at me, the color draining from her face. "You're," she started, voice barely above a whisper. "You're Clara?" I let the silence sit between us, long enough for her realization to settle. Then I leaned back slightly, folded my hands on the desk, and said, calm and measured, "We're here to discuss your qualifications." She stared at me as if the ground had shifted beneath her. I didn't know. I thought you didn't survive?" I finished for her, my tone still professional. "I did, and I built this company. We help small businesses fix broken systems. It's funny, really. Sometimes broken systems look a lot like broken families." Her eyes glistened, but I saw more confusion than remorse. "Clara, I cut her off gently, my voice never rising. "Let's stay on topic. You've had some leadership experience, yes? Tell me, how do you handle conflict when one person believes they deserve more than another?" Her lips parted, but no words came. The silence between us thickened, filled with every unspoken memory of our old home, our parents, that night. I watched her shrink slightly in her chair, not out of shame perhaps, but out of recognition. When the interview finally ended, I stood and extended my hand. She hesitated, then took it. Her fingers trembled slightly. "You've done well for yourself," she said softly. "So have you," I replied. Then I added, more quietly, "The world has a strange sense of balance. 5 years ago, you closed the door. Now I hold one open." Her eyes welled again, but she didn't speak. She turned, clutching her portfolio, and walked out of the office. I watched her through the glass as she passed the reception desk, her shoulders squared, her steps measured, but her reflection in the window betrayed her, pale, shaken, unsteady. When she disappeared down the hallway, Maya stepped back in, tablet in hand. "So," she asked, glancing at me, "should we hire her?" I looked toward the window, where the rain had started to fall again, soft against the glass. "Let's give her a chance," I said finally. "Everyone deserves one." Maya nodded and left, her footsteps fading into the hum of the office. For a long time, I just stood there, watching the rain trace thin lines down the window. I thought about that bus stop, that $20 bill, that version of me who thought she'd been erased. And then I thought of Lena, her practiced smile cracking for the first time, the silence that followed. It didn't feel like revenge. It didn't even feel like victory. It felt like completion, the closing of a loop that had begun in the rain 5 years earlier. As I turned off the lights and walked toward the elevator, I glanced once more at the framed bracelet on the wall. The words "unknown address" still glimmered faintly under the light. Not anymore, I thought. Not anymore. The morning after the interview, the article hit the front page of the Seattle Business Chronicle. The headlines stretched across the glossy paper in clean, bold letters. "From homeless teen to CEO. How Clara Lane built Emerge Talent Solutions from the ground up." The photo beneath it showed me standing in the office window, rain streaking down the glass like silver threads. I hadn't expected it to spread so far, but by noon, it was everywhere: LinkedIn, Facebook, local news feeds. And, inevitably, it found its way back to Indiana. Hundreds of miles away, in the same living room I once called home. My sister sat at the kitchen table with her phone trembling slightly in her hand. Her face was pale, eyes wide as she stared at the article. My name, Clara Lane, sat just below the photo, but the image was unmistakable. The same sharp jawline, the same eyes she'd seen in the mirror 1,000 times, only now they carried a quiet authority she didn't recognize. "Mom," she whispered, voice unsteady. "Mom, you need to see this." Diane looked up from her tablet, distracted at first, until Lena turned the screen toward her. The color drained from her face as she read the headline aloud. "Robert," she called, her voice cracking. "Robert, look, it's her." My father appeared from the hallway, adjusting his reading glasses. "What's all the noise about?" he grumbled, but his tone died the second his eyes met the photo. For a long moment, no one spoke. The house was filled only with the hum of the refrigerator and the faint tick of the clock on the wall. Then my mother's hand started to shake. "She's alive," she whispered. "She's alive and successful." My father swallowed hard, then reached for his phone. "Give me her number." Lena hesitated. "She changed it." "Then call her work." "Find her," my mother snapped, panic and shame blending in her tone. "We need to talk to her. We need to fix this." Although, within minutes, they found the company website Emerge Talent Solutions, Seattle. My photo appeared again on the About Us page, smiling slightly under the caption, "Founder and CEO." My mother dialed the office number, her hands trembling. The first call went straight to voicemail. She hung up, tried again. The second time, the line rang longer, then clicked to another recorded voice. "Thank you for calling Emerge Talent Solutions. Please leave a message after the tone." She tried a third time. This time, the line was busy. My father exhaled sharply. "She changed her number," he said flatly, though his voice carried something between guilt and disbelief. We can't just leave it like this, my mother murmured, her voice small now. She's our daughter. Lena stayed silent. For the first time in her life, she didn't have anything to add. That night, while the lights in Seattle glowed against the rain, my parents sat in their quiet house in Indiana, the silence heavy as confession. My mother picked up her phone again, scrolling through old contacts. Email her, she said suddenly. You've seen her. You spoke to her. She'll answer you. Lena hesitated. Mom, I don't think she… Please, Diane interrupted, her voice breaking. Just tell her we're sorry. Tell her we're proud. So Lena sat at the same kitchen table where we'd once eaten in silence as children and typed slowly. Subject: Mom wants to talk. Body: She saw the article. She's been crying all day. Dad too. They said they were wrong. They just want to hear your voice. Please, Clara. She stared at the message for a long time before hitting send. Meanwhile, in my office overlooking the gray skyline, I was reviewing new client proposals when the email notification appeared at the corner of my screen. The sender's name froze me. Lena Brown. For a moment, the entire world seemed to narrow to that single subject line. Mom wants to talk, please. I clicked it open and read every word slowly. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. They just want to hear your voice. My throat tightened, but my hands stayed still. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the email as if the right response might write itself. But nothing came. The years between us, the cold nights, the rejection, the hospital light sat heavy between every sentence. I didn't delete it. I didn't reply either. I just watched the cursor blink until the screen dimmed. Back in Indiana, days passed. My mother called again and again. Each voicemail grew more desperate than the last. Clara, it's Mom. Please, call us back. We saw the article. We're proud of you, honey. It's been too long, sweetheart. We made mistakes. You have to understand. We were just scared back then. Robert and I, your father and I, we want to make things right. Please, call us. When the voicemails filled the inbox, they began sending letters to the office address listed online. Handwritten, shaky, filled with phrases like "we were wrong," "we miss you, please forgive us." My assistant sorted the mail one morning and left the envelopes on my desk without comment. I didn't open them. Every time the office phone rang and the caller ID flashed private number, my chest tightened. Sometimes, I'd lift the receiver halfway before setting it down again. One afternoon, Maya found me standing by the window, my phone vibrating in my hand. You okay, Clara? She asked softly. I looked out at the rain, the same kind of drizzle that had once soaked through my graduation gown. For years, I said quietly, I begged for their attention. Now they beg for my voice. Weh. Maya waited, sensing there was more. That's not victory, I added, turning the phone face down on the windowsill. That's gravity. Everything that falls eventually hits the ground. The phone kept buzzing. The screen lit up Mom calling. I watched it until it stopped. Then I switched it to silent, the vibration fading into nothing. Outside, the rain picked up, streaking the glass with long, silver trails. Inside, the office hummed with live keyboards clicking, voices laughing, doors opening. My team was planning the next expansion, talking about new clients in Oregon and Chicago. The world kept moving. So did I. I turned away from the window and walked back to my desk. The $20 bill hung framed beside the company logo, catching a faint reflection of light. I adjusted it slightly, making sure it was straight, then sat down and opened a new document. There were still systems to build, people to help, lives to shape. Behind me, my phone vibrated once more, muffled against the desk. I didn't turn it over. I didn't need to. Some connections aren't meant to be restored, they're meant to remind us how far we've traveled. As the rain softened into mist, I took a breath, steady and full, and whispered to myself, I have work to do. And with that, I began typing again. The night was soft with rain when I returned to the place where everything had ended and begun. The limo slowed as we turned onto County Road 17, headlights cutting through a curtain of drizzle. Outside the window, the world looked half dream, half memory: wet asphalt, quiet trees, the faint hum of cicadas under the sound of rain. Then I saw at the old bus stop. The same dented metal bench. The same flickering streetlight, still humming weakly against the darkness. 5 years had passed, but the scene had barely changed. The road, the light, even the air felt suspended in that one endless night of my life. The driver stopped near the curb and glanced back. "Take your time, Miss Lane," he said softly. I nodded, slipping on my coat before stepping out. The rain touched my face like a familiar hand. It wasn't cold this time, just steady, like the rhythm of something long awaited. My heels clicked on the damp gravel as I walked toward the bench. I carried a small bouquet of wildflowers, wrapped in simple brown paper. I didn't know why I'd bought them, maybe to leave a mark, a kind of quiet tribute to the version of myself that once sat here, scared, shivering, and forgotten. When I reached the bench, I brushed away a thin film of water and laid the flowers down. Their colors glowed faintly beneath the yellow light. Then, from my coat pocket, I pulled out a small glass frame, the $20 bill, still preserved, the paper faded but intact. I set it gently beside the bouquet. "This is where they left me," I whispered, my voice almost lost in the rain. "But this is where I found myself." I stood there for a while, listening to the water pattering against the metal roof of the shelter. Across the street, the same old convenience store still flickered with its tired neon sign. I remembered standing there that first night, soaked, exhausted, with pneumonia already creeping through my lungs. I remembered wondering if the world would notice if I just disappeared. It hadn't, not then. But I had learned to notice myself. The rain began to thicken, tracing cold rivers down my cheeks. I couldn't tell if they were raindrops or tears. My phone buzzed in my pocket, interrupting the stillness. I took it out, wiped the screen. The name flashed brightly: Mom calling. For a long second, I simply stared at it, the reflection of the streetlight glimmering across the glass. My fingers hovered over the screen. The sound of rain against the bench filled the silence, each drop echoing the heartbeat of the moment. I could answer. I could end it all with one word: hello. But I didn't. Instead, I pressed the side button, silencing the call. The ringtone faded, replaced by the steady whisper of rain. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, eyes still on the bouquet. "Sometimes silence isn't revenge," I murmured. "It's peace." For years, I had dreamed of what I would say if they ever called, how I'd confront them, make them hear every ounce of pain they'd caused. But, standing here now, in the same place where it all began, I realized I didn't need words. I didn't need to win. I had already built something greater than their apology could ever give me. The limo door opened behind me, spilling warm light onto the wet road. The driver waited silently, understanding without asking. I took one last look at the bench, the flowers resting softly against the metal, the framed bill shining faintly under the lamplight. For a moment, I imagined my younger self sitting there again, holding that crumpled money, whispering promises into the dark. I wanted to tell her she'd made it, that the pain would end, that she'd grow into the kind of woman who didn't just survive, she led. I turned and walked back toward the car. The rain softened into mist as I stepped inside. The leather seat was warm, the hum of the engine steady. Through the window, the bus stop grew smaller, just a patch of gold light fading into the night. As we pulled away, the reflection of the streetlight slid across my face, no longer the harsh glare of abandonment, but something gentler, almost tender. The same rain that once drenched me in despair now glimmered like silver threads in the headlights. The same night that once swallowed me whole now felt like a closing chapter, not a wound. By the time we reached the city, the streets of Seattle were gleaming with morning dew. The first hints of dawn stretched over the skyline, painting everything in soft gold. I arrived at the office early, long before anyone else. The lobby was quiet except for the faint hum of the elevator. When I stepped into my floor, the space smelled faintly of fresh coffee and rain-soaked air. I walked past the glass conference rooms, past the framed photos of our team, until I reached the front wall where a new metal plaque had just been installed. I stopped and read it slowly. Emerge Talent Solutions, because everyone deserves a future. I touched the words with my fingertips, tracing the grooves in the metal. 5 years ago, I had been told I didn't deserve one. Now, I was giving others the future I had once been denied. The office lights flickered on as the automatic system sensed movement. The morning sun spilled across the polished floors, warming everything it touched. I turned toward my desk, the same 3 objects waiting where I'd left them: the hospital bracelet, the framed $20 bill, the company logo. The light hit them just right, and for a moment, the reflections merged into one. I sat down, exhaled deeply, and smiled, not the smile of triumph, but of release. The rain outside slowed to a drizzle, the city waking up beneath it. And as I opened my laptop to begin another day, I whispered softly to the past, to the bench, to the girl I once was. Have you ever been left behind by the people who should have lifted you up? Tell me your city so I'll know you're not alone at that bus stop.